Okay.
Sorry.
No problem. So
I will think of that slide.
yeah, thank you. The introductory image shows troubled water at Kolonna, and this is somehow also my feeling regarding some of what I would like to present to you today. Therefore, I have structured my lecture, my presentation into a couple of points. There's a small introductory note on Kolonna, on its phasing system, and the stratigraphy and chronology, as well as the pottery documentation and analysis, as I think that this is a key essential point for running statistical analysis. And then I would like only to focus on 3 examples from Kolonna representing the early Bronze Age 3, the Middle Bronze Age, and the beginning of the Late Bronze Age. And the final image will be basically, hopefully, a forecast of additional analysis that we may be able to do soon. So Kolonna, as you may know, is centered in the Saronic Gulf in close proximity to Athens, to Attica, and the Peloponnese. It is an island site, and the aerial view of the Kolonna Peninsula shows the extent of the prehistoric site. It's about 4 hectares large. The encircled area, do we have a pointer somewhere? Or is this the pointer? Basically, the encircled area shows the main areas of my research interest and of what I would like to present to you today. This is the prehistoric settlement in the innermost part of the
It's better to show it so that people see it, because if you show it here,
Okay.
they won't see it online.
So how do I show it?
With your finger, with the mouse.
But I don't see the mouse.
Exactly.
I say. So, excuse me. So basically, this is the prehistoric inner part of the settlement. This is the fortification wall that was built in the early Bronze Age. And this is a new area of excavation where I had the honor the pleasure to conduct a couple of years ago. So those 3 areas are the basis of my explanations. This is a short image on the Kolonna phasing system that covers basically the entire Bronze Age from the Neolithic to the Mycenaean period. You have to remember or have in mind that the originally established Kolonna sequence in Roman numbers, Roman number 1 to 10, this is basically the sequence of the architecture, and more precisely the sequence of the fortification walls that were built in the early Bronze Age and in the Middle Bronze Age. And in order to overcome problems to describe deposits, we tried to invent basically a parallel system for describing pottery deposits, not having basically a problem saying Kolonna 5 pottery is simultaneous with the Kolonna 6 fortification wall, and so on and so forth. And in the next column, you see the number of radiocarbon C14 samples that we were able to do thanks to the funding of the CM 2000 project that I was also part of, like Irmgardheim, and the research areas with their relevant stratigraphic sequences are also displayed. And on the very right-hand side, you see very nice models made already in the 1980s on the Kolonna settlement and its fortification. So this is basically the early Bronze 3 fortification wall that you see, a large building that we excavated between 2000 and 2010 in the innermost part of the settlement, and a potter's kiln that is sitting on top of this large buildings. When it comes to our stratigraphy and the chronological sampling, we tried to select as far as we can short-lived samples that were attributed to ceramic phases, respectively architectural phases, and they were analyzed and published by the Vienna team by Eva Wild in 2010, and this was the first time at Kolonna, and I think also for larger areas of the Greek mainland, where such a large sequence of radiocarbon C14 dates has been published. What is important regarding the documentation of pottery is following. When we started the CM2000 project, I was asked to work on a very large chronological sequence that covers the early Bronze 3 to the shaft grave period, to late Helladic 1, late Helladic 2. And for all of you who are not familiar with the various classification systems, there is no agreement on a uniform classification system. So people working or scholars working in the early Bronze 3 developed a different system to scholars working in the Middle Bronze and likewise in the Late Bronze Age. And in order not to bias the pottery recording, we tried to come up with a neutral system that describes visual features that you could easily describe and leave aside cultural connotations such as this must be a Minoan shirt, or this is a Mycenaean shirt, or this is matte painted Middle Bronze Age, and therefore this layer is Middle Bronze Age. So we came up with a kind of developed system that allows additions, and the basic idea that I took from Jerry Rotter's publication of the Learner 3 material was a basic distinction between pattern painted, solidly painted, and unpainted in various grades. Completely independent from this classification is the coding of the macroscopic group. We had the good fortune to analyze those macroscopic groups in the book project that is published in 2011 together with Vangelia Kyriatsi, where we could show that the macroscopic groups to a very large degree have a large overlap with the scientifically based groupings. So our group 1 and 2 is the locally produced pottery, and all the groups afterwards, like 3 to at the moment 35 or 40, are imports that have been found at Kolonna in various quantities. And apart from that, of course, we try and record other features such as rim types, base types, dimensions, percentages, but of course also character shapes and motifs, and other features such as the modes of production, whether we think a fragment or a piece of pottery is made on the wheel finished, or hand built. All this is to a certain extent important, as you may see here, that the overall amount of our pottery is unpainted, plain pottery, and almost to an almost equal degree solidly painted and pattern painted. So in all our assemblages, unpainted plain pottery is dominant, and you see what I try to show on the right chart is the degree of how unpainted plain pottery dominates, especially the earliest ceramic phases of the early Bronze Age and the beginning of the Middle Bronze Age. And it is only in the advanced stages of the Middle Bronze Age, which we call here at Kolonna phase I and phase J, where pattern painted pottery becomes a rather significant amount in the find assemblages. Basically, to cut a very long story short, we have contexts that basically have no pattern painted pottery at all. Furthermore, Kolonna is of interest as we have a relatively high share of imported pottery. Again, if you only use the diagnostic rims that I used here for my presentation, in total from early Bronze 3 to the shaft grave period, we have about 17% of imported pottery on the total. And at the right side of the bar chart, you see the amount and the percentages, and you see easily to detect in almost all ceramic phases, you have an amount of 10 to 20% of imported pottery at Kolonna. And this is one of the reasons why Kolonna is of interest for the adjacent Greek mainland and for other areas. As you will see in the lower part of the chart, those are the numbers of different macroscopic groups, which means macroscopic group 44, that distribute through time at our stratified deposits. And then another point why Kolonna is of interest for other areas in Greece is that Kolonna, since the end of the early Bronze Age, was a pottery production center. That means that pottery from Kolonna was transported on whatever means to especially the Greek mainland and to other important sites, but also sites that lack a stratigraphic sequence, which means if we can come up with a cumbersome solution on our chronology at Kolonna, other sites will benefit from our outcome because they may be able to date their own settlement sequence in a better way. And likewise with the imports, we have so many different categories of imports. If we are able to basically isolate certain clusters of imports, that those areas also benefit from our results as long as we can at least geographically limit the places of origin. When I was invited, I thought, okay, let's try and start playing with correspondence analysis. And I have to say, I almost, I was desperate because I was not able to produce meaningful results, which clearly shows that one point is data collection and the other point is the data processing that will allow you to do a correspondence analysis. And I have to thank Bernie Weninger a lot for helping me in producing the first CA analysis. And when discussing with Bernie the last couple of days, but also during the last 2 weeks, it became quite clear that one problem in the Kolonna data set may be that I wanted too much, I put in too much information, and therefore it became such a dense cloud. And this is what I labeled challenges. So the large number of samples, those 4,000 samples, only regard diagnostic rim fragments. It's not the entire assemblage. If you only combine at Kolonna the classification in a relatively low resolution, I'm not speaking about the highest possible resolution of our classification system, but a relatively low resolution with macroscopic groups and rim types, you end up in almost 800 variables, and some of which only have one representative. Others have, if it's a local produced pot, more than 1,000 representatives. So we have a huge difference in the homogeneity or heterogeneity of the contexts and of the individual phases. And I think this was something important for me to realize, and I wanted to share this observation with this audience here. Coming now to a few selected examples, as I said, we have the Kolonna 5 settlement destruction horizon. This is a destruction horizon of key importance for the entire site of Kolonna, as this is a site-wide destruction horizon. The entire settlement got burned, and we found masses, for Kolonna, means masses of complete or completely preserved vessels in the destruction horizon. And from this destruction horizon, we were able to analyze 11 samples, most of which come from in situ contexts, which means 1 year seeds were burned in a pot that was standing on the floor. So we have a very good possibility to be accurate and to exclude the circulation of botanical stuff in the accumulated Earth, because as it comes from a destruction horizon. At the base, you see characteristic pottery. I would like to point out basically to macroscopic group 2 at the right hand. This is one of the few pattern painted pieces. It is painted in a matte paint, but the matte paint is not uniform in character. If you would turn the pot around, it starts becoming red, which means this paint is iron-based. And I say this because the example I would like to introduce you in a minute will show this. Regarding the imports, this is again only a selection of imports that were found in the destruction horizon. It is basically the adjacent Greek mainland and Boeotia, perhaps Attica. Certainly no imports from the Cyclades and no imports from Crete. And when it comes to the pattern painted pottery in the next ceramic phases, we observed a distinct change between the kind of matte paint that would use. So from an iron-based matte paint basically to a manganese-based paint. And I wanted to basically test this observation in CA. And what I did was I used all the rims that had the appropriate characterizations. And you see, in contrast to my expectations, the closest match between the red dot symbolizes a late pattern painted early Helladic 3 pot. So according to my own expectations, this red dot should be found close to phase E and F. But this is not the case. It is very close to phase I, which is the advanced Middle Bronze Age, whereas the classical matte painted pottery that is marked by a green dot is very close to phase H, which is perfectly fine. When I started wondering why the red dot is so close to phase I realized that also in the advanced Middle Bronze Age, the character of the matte paint starts changing again, and it becomes again reddish to blackish. And we have a far higher amount of counts for those for this phase than for the preceding phase E and F. And this may be the reason why in CA, the red dot goes towards the advanced Middle Bronze Age and not towards the early Bronze Age where I would expect it. So continuing quickly to the advanced Middle Bronze Age, and this is the example, of course, that I just showed. This is the phase when Kolonna is basically reaching its peak. It's the phase when we see Minoan influence at Kolonna, when we have an elite burial in front of its fortification walls. We have a very rich ceramic assemblage, a few diagnostic pieces. So this is what is called matte painted pottery. You see, there is no kind of hue. It's a manganese-based paint. It always gets dark. We have a huge variety of imports that I illustrate again as a selection in the next image. At the top line, you see the parallels that are most prominent is Lerna in the Argolid, the Middle Bronze Age phases there. And what is, again, as an example, you see a footed cup, carinated cup from macroscopic group 3, which is the Cyclades. At the same time, we see a high share of locally produced red monochrome, solidly painted and burnished footed cups or flat-based cups. And I started wondering, where does this plot in correspondence analysis? And again, the local stuff is marked with a red dot. The solidly painted and red local stuff makes its first appearance in phase H. And we have a kind of nice close correlation between phase H and number 16 that I encircled here. And interestingly enough, this local stuff afterwards seems to decline. So we don't have that many objects in the succeeding phase I, whereas we have a high share of cycladic imports in both phases, H and I, and this may explain the kind of large distance between the encircled number 15 between phases H and I. Coming to the beginning of the Late Bronze Age, or the Late Bronze Age, how we are able to define it at Kolonna. As I said, we have a huge problem because the amount of pattern painted pottery is not very large, but we were lucky to find a nice floor horizon deposit that was introduced already a couple of times in previous presentations and publications. So I can cut a longer story short. The best parallels for this floor deposit that produced a couple of also mendable vessels is the filling of the shaft graves at Lerna. And you see an image that I owe Michael Lindblom, where he put together the best comparisons between the Aegina floor deposit and the fillings of the shaft graves. And at the same time, one should know and note that the best comparisons between the Lerna shaft grave fillings there's a close connection, let's put it that way, there's a good connection and overlap in what you find in the Lerna shaft graves and what is found in the volcanic destruction horizon at Thera. So it could well be that this is basically one and the very same time horizon. And not to forget, the volcanic destruction horizon at Thera also contained a couple of Aeginetan imports, predominantly Aeginetan bichrome painted pottery that unfortunately we miss in this context here. So again, you see the range of imports. It did change a bit to the preceding to the advanced Middle Bronze Age, as we do have for the first time also imports from the southeastern part of the Aegean. These are dummies. Our stratified fragments are much smaller, but share or show the same decoration. So when I started asking myself, what we have Aeginetan bichrome painted, clearly at a Kolonna attested and locally produced, not in the phase that not in this floor deposit that I showed, but in fill layers on top and some of which beyond, and the so-called lustrous decorated mainland polychrome or Boeotian polychrome that you see here. And when I plotted those against against CA, I was again surprised and disappointed at the same time. And I started wondering myself, why do we have those two dots basically in the middle of the nowhere? And one possible explanation could be, what I did analyze here are diagnostic rim fragments. Most of the bichrome painted pottery that we find at Kolonna is body fragments. And therefore, it could be that we simply need to integrate to have a better control also the body fragments. And it's not by accident that the regarding samples that I show you are not rim fragments, but body fragments. Coming to a quick outlook, after having submitted the samples, the radiocarbon C14 samples for exporting and being processed by Eva Maria Wild and her team, Michael Lindblom and I, we started wondering whether or not we will be able to produce more reliable radiocarbon C14 dates, samples for whatever comes after the phase we label late Helladic 1 at Kolonna. And we went back to the context, and we are very happy to have isolated a series of 10 to 20 samples from various areas within the stratigraphic sequence that date to either the late Helladic 1 floor horizon or a parallel floor, a floor next to that, or were found on the stratigraphic sequence on top of that and sitting on the next floor of it. So we have hopefully a good chance to prolong the Kolonna stratigraphic radiocarbon C14 sequence if the Greek authorities permit an export and we find the money for the analysis. But we have good hopes to basically overcome the not well-defined boundaries between the late Middle Bronze Age, the beginning of the Late Bronze Age, and Late Bronze Age 2 at Kolonna, with about additionally 20 samples, hopefully. And what you see here is basically pottery that was found on the gray, either in between the late Helladic 1 floor horizon that I just was mentioning and showed you the images, and the floor horizon on top of it, and especially this locally produced, locally made high-footed goblet was found lying on the floor horizon, almost complete, with a couple of other completely mendable vessels, but unfortunately either unpainted or solidly painted. And with this small forecast or outlook on future adventures at Kolonna regarding also CA analysis and radiocarbon possibilities, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much. Do you want to stay where you are?
Sorry.
You might like to answer a question. I don't know. Anyway, it seems to be it's a very brave try that a brave stab at CA that you've made with uneven results, but you're prepared to find out the reasons why it hasn't worked in this instance and that.
Yeah, you see, I don't want to do statistics just because on the statistical reasons. I would like to use, if this is possible, to use the statistical analysis also to test own observations at the show table, or through thinking of the context and see, am I able to reproduce, or is the statistical analysis with the methods I used able to reproduce in one or the other way my observations? And if it does not, what are the reasons for that?
Yes, quite. Now, are there any questions from the floor at the moment? Right, two. Tiziano,
it's not really a question, rather congratulations for not only your brave attempt, but also the way that you showed exactly what we want to do, what we think is the best way to use the correspondence analysis in particular, and in general statistical analysis. But that is exactly the point. It's not that important to get a result immediately, but to understand, to use this, to go back and understand, to make it easier to go back to the data and understand what is happening exactly there. I think it was a very, very fascinating attempt. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you. I mean, again, repeating myself, if I would not have been invited here, I would have certainly hesitated to start this process. As I told you, I was really in agony as I accumulated so much data throughout the years, and then having basically a huge blob that means nothing was really frustrating. And it took me a lot of thinking and also communications, not only with Bernie Weninger, but with other friends in the community, to make me understand and being aware of, it's not basically all you can eat and you throw in and you expect immediately a result. It's a time-consuming process that needs careful evaluation.
Yeah, thank you. I like that as well. I like the courses speaking. I wonder, you showed first a plot where you have put in all the things, and that looked terrific, actually.
Excuse me for interruption. This was not all features. This was only the combination of 3 features. You see the plot that Bernie Weninger made for me. This was you see, when I thought, what could I present? What may be meaningful in regard of a chronological development at the Kolonna sequence? So we don't have, luckily, we have a stratigraphic sequence. So we have an idea of where the pot or the fragment should date. So it's not a matter of we have no clue. My problem was the way we recorded and I recorded pottery. In which way can the many different variables be combined to have a chronological meaning? And I thought, okay, let's use the general classification, the macroscopic group, and the rim type. And I used the rim type and not the vessel shape because we have so much fragmented pottery. And at the end, I would not be able to be specific on the vessel shape as it's not conclusive. It's not so easy to say this must be this vessel. So I thought I used the rim types, and it's only what Bernie produced and what I asked him to do was those 780 variables on 4,000 entries.
That was the first draft.
Yeah, this was the first draft. This was the thick banana.
Yeah. But this is very nice. And then if you just try to filter the outliers there, and because I was wondering why you then continued with this reduced data set where all your shapes are popping together. But I find very convincing your explanation. So you try to find out why does that happen. But anyway, so using the entire picture can also give a result. And if you combine then the radiocarbon data, that would be really interesting to see what comes out.
Yeah, I think this will be the next step. And hopefully we have the possibility to do that. I mean, we have the possibility. It just seems a continuous approach in working with the stratigraphic sequence.
There were no misunderstandings, and Heiko had exactly the point. The banana is not the beginning of it's the end. I took out, he gave me, he sent me a cloud of data, and I took out 30% of all the entries. And then all of a sudden I saw banana. And what I was completely shocked about was that this noise, and I went back to large amounts of the input data, it just looked like a cloud. And the pottery series diagram is what you can see in the scores was a cloud. And in the pottery series, you can see the structure. And that was fascinating because normally you think if you have noise here, you have noise there. And that's not the case. And this is it makes me very optimistic that we could work with CA and perhaps in directions that we don't understand yet.
Yeah, and may I add, I mean, one problem, maybe from my naive understanding, one problem that it became such a noisy sound was that what we analyzed is basically a 600-year development. So it's not a short-lived example, it's a very long duration in the development of pottery.
Now, any more questions before we have a break? No. So we'll have a break for 20 minutes. Many thanks, Walter.